Hello and welcome to Property Matters, and this is an election special. Joining me today are Dan Knowles, Steve Wayne and Rayna Hunter. Now Dan, you're FRICS and Director of Websters Surveyors.
Good. I am. Good. Thanks for inviting me.
Steve Wayne, you're MD of Benjamin Stevens Estate Agents.
That's
welcome
me.
to you.
Thank you.
And Rayna Hunter is CEO of LH1 Global International Buy-to-Let and Development Specialist. Welcome to you.
Hello.
Now, what I want to do today is talk about perhaps not too much of the past, but a little bit of the past. We've had some difficulties with property legislation and direction, and the market's not been that wonderful the last couple of years. And then move on to what we hope for and what our aspirations are for the coming years with whoever we get that wins the election. And I think we have a good idea who's coming in, but of course until the 4th of July we're not going to know for sure, are we? So Rayna, if I could start with you, you have both a knowledge of sort of both home economics as far as property is concerned and also in the international market. So what have your disappointments been and what are your hopes?
Oh, that's a good question, really. I mean, there's so much, we probably haven't got time to cover it all off today, but I think the long and the short of it is I think it's very important to continue to encourage investment in property, whether that be international investors buying into the UK, because of course that helps regenerate the property market as a whole. So I would just want to sort of try to see whatever government gets in that they're endorsing and supporting and being proactive when it comes to encouraging inward bound investment.
Well, I mean, one of the difficulties that we've had is there's been such inconsistency with the legislation. I wonder, how's that affected the minds of people? I'm thinking perhaps particularly in the Asia Pacific areas who've historically invested in London in a very big way. I wonder how much all this sort of dallying about has put them off.
Well, we used to see, quite a lot of inward bound investment from the Hong Kong market. That sort of went off the boil recently. But what we tend to say in our industry is where one market might be particularly buoyant and interested in investing in UK, if they deviate from that, then another rising market comes in. So interestingly, we've sort of seen a lot of Turkish buyers coming in recently. And I think it's always because they see UK as a strong, secure investment opportunity, which then in turn, of course, helps generate more residences for people in UK that need houses.
Our legals are very secure here, aren't they? And quite commendable, really. Anybody else got any views on the dilly-dallying of the government over this last year? I mean, Dan, I can imagine as a sort of FRICS surveyor, must be a nightmare keeping up with all this legislation or no legislation, whichever the case may be.
It is absolutely, and the one thing that jumps to mind, of course, is the new leasehold reform legislation. Running up to when Rishi Sunak said we're going to call a general election, I think most of the industry thought that it would all fall to one side, that it perhaps wouldn't happen. And then in the final hours before Parliament was prorogued, all of a sudden we've got this new piece of legislation. All of the potential contentious parts are dropped for the time being, and we've got this legislation that says if you want to extend your lease or if you want to buy your freehold, these are the bare bones on how it's going to work and what it's going to cost you. But the problem is the legislation is subject to some additional secondary legislation that comes through with the next Parliament. In simple terms, what Parliament has done is they've passed legislation with a few enter figure here parts in fluorescent yellow to be determined at a later date.
So effectively, it's not through?
It's not, no. We know what the law is going to say, apart from some of the key bits that everyone's waiting for. What's it actually going to cost for me to extend my lease? What's it going to cost for me to to buy my freehold, but we won't know that until a later date. We don't know when we're going to know that either. It could be a month after the election, it could be years after.
The government seems to be taking a sort of blanket approach on these things. And I would say, I mean, two that I was involved with down the road, 70% were buyers from the Asia Pacific areas. And I mean, fine, you can talk to them about buying the freehold or getting involved in the management of one thing or another. And they're all very interested until you say, of course, you're going to have to put in $5,000 for the legal costs and all the rest of it. And they disappear like a rat up a drain pipe, and you never hear from them again.
Well, government seem to be going after the headlines at the moment. And the major headline is to make it cheaper for leaseholders with leases under 80 years by abolishing something called marriage value. But what government, and this is all political parties at the moment, what no one seems to be saying is, well, what about the other elements of the calculation? Are they going to give with one hand and then take away with another hand? Is it going to be that longer leases actually become more expensive to extend? We're finding a lot of, well, the whole industry at the moment are finding a lot of people with longer leases now want to extend because they're worried about what's coming around the corner. Uncertainty doesn't help anyone right now.
Steve, you've got, you know, 8 agency units that are dealing with the public, obviously, and you know, some of these reforms and changes might not affect those people on a day-to-day basis, but I imagine you've got a lot of smaller buy-to-let investors that deal with your agencies, and how are they feeling?
Yeah, obviously things? We also do block management, so actually we're quite involved in this. People are worried. People don't know what's coming, and if you don't know what's coming, you don't want to invest your money. So what you're seeing is a lot of these small landlords who are getting to 85, 90-year leases, they want to get out, and suddenly people want to buy houses, and there's only so many houses. You can build flats as high as you want to go, but houses, you can't do that. So by giving the uncertainty, suddenly you're almost causing a new problem for the market.
I mean, you know, people sort of forget, you know, I think, again, the government tend to demonise leasehold, but at the end of the day, leasehold, particularly in London, where it's most prevalent, I suppose, is to ensure the good management of a block, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can't rely on, you know, 500 or 1,000 people to all have, you know, similar views on what and how they want to live. I mean, it's very difficult.
Yeah, when you talk about the problem about changing legislations, buying the freehold, you know, we look after a lot of blocks, and you know, in an average block of say 35, 40, you've only got 6 or 7 people that live there. A landlord who's in Asia really isn't interested about extending his lease or buying the freehold, being part of a directors committee. And unfortunately, what you've got is people who just don't care. And you've got sort of this small part which want to get things sorted, wants to grow their leases, but in a nice way, someone who you sell something to in Asia, and you say to him, would you like to go on the board? He can't think of anything worse. And that's a problem, is the whole system is broken. And actually what you end up getting a lot of the time, and we experience it, we look after 150 estates. And I mean this in the nicest way. Some of the people are almost, who are our directors, who are the head of the committee, they're not fit for purpose. They're almost take that role by default. And actually if you're looking at things to change, you know, us as estate agents should be regulated. You know, that's a massive issue that's not been done. People who are the person in response and responsible looking after a block of flats in behalf of the other 80 or 90 people, they should also be regulated. And actually, the whole industry is a little bit still wild, wild west.
Yes.
And this is where the potential solution of common hold may actually cause more problems than solutions it provides. Leaseholders at the moment who aren't, maybe they're not happy with how their freeholder's managing a block, well, they can go down a right to manage route. Or if they really don't like their freeholder, then they can collectively buy the freehold. But with proposals from the Law Commission, which I understand that Labour are now looking to take on, of actually introducing common hold as the go-to tenure for what is currently leasehold, then there are going to be plenty of people who don't really want the responsibilities of managing a block, who are going to be lumbered with that responsibility.
Do you know what? You go into this stuff, you sign a contract, your landlords sign the contract. you've signed the contract, you both agreed it, so why not just stick to it? So if your tenancy is 2 years, then there you are, you're there for 2 years. If it's 10 years, you're there for 10 years. If it's 6 months, it's 6 months. You know, just why don't you just do what you signed to do?
I think you find in today's world, that's not the way the world works today, though. People don't do what they're told. You know, you see a zebra crossing here and people cross the road here. We don't live in a world where people follow the rules. And you've also got a second thing. People go and read an AST. If you look at most leases are written in the 1900s, they use words that just no one can understand. And I think
I've said this on our programs before. I mean, I've seen cut and pasted leases for some of these 70-story blocks, where it says, and you shall clean your chimney twice annually. When
the developments that we work with are obviously new builds off plans. So because of the the fear about the Reform Act that was coming in, all our developer partners implemented 999-year leases, which obviously helped eradicate the problems of perhaps older blocks. And of course now they're on those zero peppercorn rents, which I think has been a very good thing, and helped give some stability. And when you talk about tenancies, of course we offer for landlords straight AST tenancies, but we, and don't shoot me down in flames, but we're big advocates of the short-term service let model, which ironically is something that gives them the flexibility to sort of move around with those tenancies.
Right. But of course, in a lot of London boroughs, that would be...
Yeah, London is an area where that, I think it's a 90-day minimum stay within
Well, you need
London.
Planning consent if you want to move into that.
So it doesn't work everywhere, obviously.
No.
Unfortunately, you're also getting a lot of people in this new world of Airbnb, rent to rents. So it's a whole new world out there, and some of the people who are doing that as well, you talk about legislations, they just don't know what they're doing and getting themselves into so many problems.
We're quite strict because we don't believe that every landlord should suddenly think that, oh, this is a fast solution. And I agree with you. So we try to, if possible, regulate it in some respects by saying they have to use a freeholder approved operator. Because I think with a lot of things to do with the general property market, it's about how well it's controlled and ensuring open lines of communication so that policies are respected, really.
Okay, well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me after break when we'll be talking about what we hope for rather than what we've seen in the past. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Matters, our election special, and I'm joined by Rayna Hunter, Steve Wayne and Dan Knowles. Welcome to you all back. So we've talked in the first half of the show about things that have left us a little bit cold, shall we say. The government hasn't performed on a lot of its promises. We've been left with legislation that's not been properly enacted. And I'm sure many others are confused about what actually has gone through and what hasn't gone through. But let's now talk about what our hopes and aspirations are. And Steve, let me start with you. With having agency shops, outlets, you really are at the coalface, aren't you, dealing with people?
Yeah, we're right at the front of it. And I think there's 3 sort of points that I think the public would like to see and us in our industry would like to see. I think the first one, and all of it's already started, and they just they lose their concentration. Roper was one of them, getting agents certified, that an agent, like in America, has to take some kind of exam. So at least they've got some kind of clue what they're talking about. There are agents out there who don't know the difference between leasehold and freehold. It's worrying. When I go and look at properties myself, just some of them just don't know what they're talking about. And I think for us as an industry to be taken seriously, that needs to come in. I think the second thing is you look at what's going on with the Section 21, and I know today Labour said if we come in, we're going to do it. It's in, it's out, it's in, it's out. And what it does, it just makes landlords feel so uncertain. So either say we're not changing it or we're changing it. The reality of it is not going to matter to the world, but to a young landlord, they really get stressed about it. At the end of the day, if you've got a bad tenant, you'll get them out however long it takes. But decide on your legislation and put it through. And I think for me, it's important that goes. And I think the third thing, which we were talking about at the break, the conveyancing process is so broken, and someone far more intelligent than me is going to have to find a way to to get that fixed. I think that's, if we can find a way at solving that problem, it's going to cut conveyancing time, it's going to cut wasted costs, and the heartache it goes for people when they don't know where they're coming or going in a 6-month process. You look at other places in the world where that's done in 30 days, and I think that needs to be changed, and that's a massive thing, that if a government came in and made that change, they would give themselves so much more staying power and time. Because there's no barrier to get into a state agency. I started when I was 17 and have gone on to build a nice business, but not everyone does. But the problem is, if you actually suddenly gave a qualification, there'd be more kudos to be an estate agent.
Would, yeah.
As agents, we could put our fees higher. And the reason self-employed and we have a self-employed model, and one of the reasons we've done it is it gives people an opportunity to earn more money.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because it's almost like a vicious circle, you can't earn more money, so you don't really want to do the extra qualifications. But actually, if you went it the other way around and you put in a qualification, suddenly the whole industry can grow, people can earn more money, and then suddenly you get better people in the industry because there's more money to be earned.
You're absolutely right. I mean, as it stands at the moment, if you can breathe, you can be an agent. I mean,
Like to buy.
You don't always need to
but
breathe.
Like that.
But there we are. Okay, Rayna, what do you think?
Well, I would just like someone to sort of put their head above the parapet and actually deliver what they say that they're going to deliver. And it's about real, I think, stabilisation.
Hey, this is politics. It ain't going to happen.
Well, I think, look, we know that the heartbeat of the country is property construction. It's so important. That actually in turn sort of feeds other, companies. So it's important that they look at property as a whole at the start, and they sort of stabilise things and ensure that they don't penalise landlords and things with big taxes, stamp duty. They should encourage inward bound investment from overseas investors, because that helps stimulate the economy as a whole. And I think they should be looking at incentives as opposed to negatives.
Okay, so what would those incentives look like? What would you like to see?
Well, I think, a classic example, I think, was Boris when he was in, not that I favour any particular party, but when he was in, and obviously for Hong Kong buyers, that they were encouraging to come and not only buy investment property, but actually come and live here. They were actually giving them a cash sum, I think. I'm not suggesting they do that to overseas investors, but I think they need to make the legislation very clear, very simple. Steve said about property conveyancing, it needs to be very coherent so everyone can understand it. It's overcomplicated, and obviously the taxes at the moment whereby people are being penalised is really actually deterring people. People are nervous. And I think I said in the beginning, UK was always perceived as a strong, stable property residential market. And it is the core of the country to actually help all the other industries, whether you're in banking or whatever else. So,
well, I mean, at one time, your house value was quite critical, because if you were starting a business or whatever, the first thing the bank would say is, what's your house worth? And, let's sign it up to the deal. So it was actually the foundation of a lot of our self-employed people, wasn't it, and their businesses. And I think we've just lost that incentive to want to go out.
The thing
and
is,
invest.
if you get the housing market right, you get the refurb market right, carpets, kitchens,
white goods,
so much. And I think the government do understand it. Housing is central. If you get the housing market moving, whether it's investment or traditional estate agency, the rest of the market moves.
Help to Buy would be good to reintroduce that, so that it gives the opportunity to those first-time buyers to get back on the housing ladder, because we know that from the bottom it resonates through to the top.
Well, it did. I have to say, though, I know a lot of developers that say it helped them a lot more than it helped anybody trying to buy. That was
both my son and my daughter used Help to Buy, and my young son, who I think was sort of 23, 24 at the time, through the Help to Buy was able to buy a property in London.
Okay.
It probably has artificially increased values above where they should have been. A lot of developers would automatically put properties at 600,000, for example, that being the cap in London. But whilst that whilst that's the case, is it a necessary evil to incentivise developers to build more homes? Both of the main two political parties they're trying to outdo each other at the moment with, well, we're going to build 150,000 homes a year. Well, no, we're going to build 160,000 homes a year. We can only do that if developers are incentivized to build. And I think Help to Buy is one way to do that.
Okay, but don't. Well, yes, I agree with you to a point. But don't you think that as far as developers are concerned, if they know they can sell their product, which in the main relies on people being able to borrow the money to buy them, they'll build as many houses as you want.
As long as it's viable. But for the last couple of years, construction costs have gone through the roof.
Yeah.
Prices have been up and down a little bit, but certainly not increasing at the rate that they used to be. It's very difficult for developers at the moment. So any incentives that we can provide to encourage them to build has to be encouraged.
Let me ask you something very controversial. I've been in property development here in London for probably about 40 years now, and I seem to have spent most of those years arguing with valuers.
Oh, music to my ears.
I'll walk off now then.
Yeah. And you know very well that there are certain valuation firms who, shall we say, do volume valuations for some of the bigger lenders. They are in the practice of undervaluing all the time. One, because they don't want to go anywhere near their insurance. And
correct.
For our viewers that don't understand, if a valuer overvalues a property and the bank loses money or the lender loses money in the end, the valuer can be sued. So they insure against that, and they're very careful not to go anywhere near the limit, so that there's no chance of them ever getting sued. But of course, from a development point of view, that's a huge obstacle. If you can't get your properties valued at what you've told your bank and your funder is what you're going to get for them, you're in trouble. And I would like to see, I know you're going to say, well, you know, there's the red book criteria for coming to that valuation. But again, a lot of these big valuation firms don't use always red book practices, do they?
Well, they certainly should do.
They should. But I've had it many times here where a valuer will come in and say, I'm not going to value this property right because there are 20,000 more apartments being built in the area that are coming on stream in the next 2 years. It's going to kill rental values. It's going to kill sales values. And I'll say, hold on, I thought Red Book said you're valuing for today.
Yeah. And that's exactly how it should be. As with any profession or any industry, there are good people and there are bad people. As chartered surveyors, we should be following the evidence. And if the evidence is number 8 sold for 600,000 and we're now valuing number 7 and it's identical, then well, unless the market's increased or fallen between those 2 points in time, the value should be exactly the same.
But you see, there you get a degenerative point, don't you? If you do get a bad valuation, in today's world of quick communication and the internet, it gets put on the internet at that low value. And then when you get the other valuers who don't actually bother coming to look at the property, they do what they call a desktop valuation. They just look it up and say, oh, well, he's valued it down there, so will I. It's a very difficult problem and it shouldn't be underestimated. Yes.
Well, I 100% agree with you, and I'm very passionate about this because I do think that there is a disconnect, and sometimes I'm often feeling inclined to contact FRICS and say, could you please speak to your surveyors so that they have a general template to run with? But I think you've hit the nail on the head. They're terrified of their professional indemnity insurance. I'm going to give you a little story. During COVID or just after COVID, we had a valuer that went on to a property in Birmingham for an apartment that we were selling, and he downvalued it. I ended up actually speaking to him and sort of said, why did you downvalue when one of your colleagues is actually valued up on another apartment? And he said, no word of a lie, well, I had to go in PPE equipment. I didn't know what I was doing and I was really worried, and I said, well, look, could I just ask you to take a deep breath and calm down and restructure your valuation, which he did. And then in a calm environment, he realised that actually he'd made a mistake and he was prepared to rectify it. But unfortunately, you can't ask that of every single surveyor.
I think sometimes the surveyors get a little bit overwhelmed. Like, you wouldn't believe the amount of surveyors who call us as estate agents and asked us to give them a comparable to one of my competitors. And it's fine for us who try to do the right thing, but if I've got a competitor who's lost out on instruction, is a little bit angst with us, it's very easy for them to turn around, oh, that's never worth that. And I find it amazing. So many times we get at least 3 calls a day from surveyors going, what do you think? I'm like, well, aren't you the one getting paid for this?
Yeah.
Okay, well, look.
Sorry.
Yeah, you hit a raw nerve.
Not this one.
Yeah, okay.
I've always hated the term down valuation. We have to value according to the evidence. So
music to my
hopefully
ears.
the correct valuation.
Okay. Look, just to finish the show off, I'm going to ask you in turn, starting with you, Steve, just in 3 or 4 words, one thing that you're really hoping for.
I think for me, it's clarity. Just trying to make everything just a little bit easier for everyone to understand, whether it's a lease, whether it's legislation. Stop trying to use language which we used 40 years ago.
Okay. Rayna?
Stability, security, strength.
Okay. And to finish off, Dan?
I'd say upfront information, digitalisation of the industry. What's the lease term? What's the ground rent? Even throwing it out there, something towards home information packs again.
Sellers packs, aren't you?
Well, there were certainly problems with them, but I think a smaller version of the same thing could really work now.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to thank you all very much. So that's Dan Knowles, Steve Wayne and Rayna Hunter. Thank you all very much for coming in today and giving us your thoughts. Thank you for watching. Join me again on Property Matters next time. I'm Stephen Galpin. See you then.